A scraper that had run untouched for 11 months died on a Tuesday morning. Every request came back refused. No status code, no error body, nothing to read. I spent 40 minutes on the wrong problem. Checked whether the target had changed, checked DNS on the box, refreshed the seller's status page twice, then opened a chat window to ask them if something was down. Nothing was down. The cause was that my home connection had picked up a new address overnight, and the proxy's whitelist still had the old one. The fix took 11 seconds once I knew, which is the part that still annoys me. That is the failure mode of address whitelisting in one line. It does not announce itself as an authentication problem. It looks exactly like the proxy being dead. Why I am the one saying this. I sell mobile proxy lines, SIM cards on Singapore carriers, modems on a shelf in my flat, and both auth methods sitting on the dashboard I hand customers. So I get to watch which one people pick, and I get to read the support message 3 weeks later when the pick was wrong. I also buy other people's proxies for my own scraping. I have been on both ends of this one. There are two methods in real use, and everything else is a variation on one of them. The two options, username and password. You attach credentials to the proxy connection and the seller checks them. It is the standard HTTP proxy handshake, and every client library has somewhere to put it. Address whitelisting. You tell the seller which source addresses are allowed to use your proxy, and traffic from those addresses goes through with no credentials at all. Some sellers give you both. Some make you choose. A few support only one of them and will not mention which until after your card has cleared, so ask before you buy. People treat this like choosing a font. It is a decision about what happens when your own address changes, and addresses change more often than anybody plans for. One thing the protocol decides for you: if you want socks rather than HTTP, check the auth support before you plan around either method. Plenty of sellers run credentials on their HTTP endpoint and whitelist only on their socks endpoint. The two sit on different ports on the same host, and they do not behave the same way. I watched somebody wire up socks with a username and password, get nothing back at all, and conclude the entire account was broken. What whitelisting assumes. Whitelisting works by trusting where the traffic came from. That is elegant and it costs nothing to run, no secret to store, no secret to leak, nothing sitting in a config file waiting to embarrass you. The assumption underneath it is that your own address holds still. For one server in one data center with one static address, that assumption is good for years. Whitelisting there is the better choice, and I would use it myself. Everywhere else the assumption is quietly false. 4 places it breaks: a laptop, you whitelist the office, then you work from a cafe and nothing runs. You whitelist the cafe, then you go home. Every network you touch is another visit to a dashboard, a home connection. Residential addresses are handed out on a lease and the lease renews. Mine changes every few weeks with no pattern I can predict, usually after the router reboots, sometimes for no reason I can find. An auto-scaling worker. This is the ugly one. Your job starts a new machine, the machine gets a fresh address, and that address is not on the list. The worker that ran yesterday was fine because it happened to keep its address. The one that came up this morning is not. And anything behind a VPN or a company network, where the address you present is whatever the exit happened to be that day. The pattern is the same in all 4. Whitelisting is a static answer to a question your infrastructure keeps answering differently. Why? You will misdiagnose it. This is the part that costs the hours. When your address is not on the list, the seller has nothing polite to say to you. There is no credential to reject, so there is no rejection message. Some sellers drop the connection with nothing attached. Some send a reset. Some let you sit there until you time out. Your HTTP client renders all of that as a transport failure. Connection refused, connection reset, timed out. The same lines you get when a proxy is genuinely down or the box has lost its route. So you go and check the proxy. You check the target. You check your own network, you restart things, and none of it goes anywhere near the actual problem, which is a row in a dashboard you last opened 4 months ago. A wrong password at least tends to come back as a 407. which points somewhere. An address that is not on the list points nowhere. The tell is a different machine. If the same config runs fine from your desktop and dies on the server, stop reading your code and go look at the list. What a whitelist entry actually is. Worth knowing before you commit to it, because the mechanics are stiffer than the dashboard makes them look. You get a fixed number of slots. 5 is common, 10 if you ask nicely. That is a hard ceiling on how many machines can reach the proxy without credentials, and it is nowhere near enough for a worker pool. A lot of sellers accept single addresses only, no ranges, so a cloud network whose shape you do not control cannot be described to them at all. And a change takes a minute or two to reach whatever is doing the checking. I have added an address, watched it fail, added it a second time, and worked out later that the first attempt had been correct and I was 3 minutes early. That cost me an afternoon. What credentials cost you? Credentials travel with the code. That is the whole pitch, and it is a good one. Deploy the same container to 3 regions and it authenticates from all 3, because the secret went along with it and nothing cares where it came from. Add a worker at 4 in the morning with nobody awake to edit a list, and it works. That portability is also the bill. A secret that travels with the code ends up in the code. I have committed proxy credentials to a repository more than once, and one of those repositories was public for about 2 days before I noticed the credential in the URL. Here is the specific mistake, and it is a different mistake from committing them. Most libraries let you write the proxy as a single URL with the username and password sitting inside it. It is compact, it works, everybody does it. Then that URL gets logged. Your HTTP client logs the request it is about to make, and the proxy is part of that request. Your retry wrapper logs the connection it failed on. Your error reporter attaches the whole config object to the report and ships it off to a service someone else runs. The crash trace prints it. The debug flag you turned on last week prints it 15,000 times. None of those lines are trying to leak anything. They are printing a URL. You put the password in the URL. I have found working proxy credentials in my own error tracker, in plain text, readable by everyone I had ever added to that project. The fix is dull. Keep the address in one variable and the credentials in another, and assemble them at the point of use instead of in your config. Rotation is a separate question. These two get conflated constantly, and they are worth pulling apart. Authentication answers whether you are allowed to use the proxy at all. Rotation answers which address you come out of. Different questions, different systems, and in principle, they have nothing to do with each other. In practice, the sellers welded them together, because your connection string was a convenient place to put configuration, and it was already there, the session username. Look at how a lot of sellers express a sticky address. You do not call an API, you do not tick a box, you put something extra in the username field, so your username stops being a name. It turns into a small configuration language, living in the field that HTTP proxy auth expects to hold an identity that has a consequence people meet late. A typo in the username does not fail as a bad username. It fails as an unrecognized option, or it quietly falls back to whatever the default behavior is. And now you have 2 problems wearing the same coat. It also means your credentials and your routing are one string. Change how you want addresses assigned, and you have edited the thing that authenticates you. Read the seller's docs on the username format before you write any of it into code. The format is theirs, it is not a standard, and it will differ from the last seller you used. Where I come down, whitelisting is fine for exactly one case. A single static server that will not move, run by somebody who will remember to update the list on the day it does move. For anything else, it is a trap. The problem is the silence. It fails at the worst possible moment, and it sends you looking at the wrong system. And every hour you spend on the wrong system is an hour the job is not running. A laptop, a home connection, anything that scales, anything behind a VPN, use credentials. I will go further than that. If a seller supports only whitelisting and you are running anything that moves, that is a reason to buy elsewhere. I have walked away from cheaper lines over it, and I would do it again. So the default I set on anything new is credentials in one environment variable, the proxy host in another, joined at the moment the client gets built. Whitelisting switched off completely, so there is no second way in that can quietly stop working while I am looking somewhere else. The limit on that whitelisting has one advantage I cannot argue away. There is no secret to leak. Nothing in a repository, nothing in a log file, nothing in an error report sitting on somebody else's server. If your team is loose with configuration, and most small teams are, that is worth real money. There is a second one, and it took me longer than it should have to see it. Revoking. With credentials, you change the password when somebody leaves the project, and everything using that password stops at the same instant, including the 4 jobs you had forgotten were using it. With a whitelist, you delete one row. Only that machine loses access, and you can find out who has access by reading the list. And there is a middle option I use more often than I admit to. Whitelist one small box, put the credentials on that box only, and route everything else through it. One address to maintain, and the secret never leaves a machine you control. It costs you a hop, a few dollars a month, and one more thing that can go down at 3 in the morning. I also cannot tell you how any given seller behaves when both methods are switched on at once. Some treat the whitelist as an override and let credentialed traffic through from anywhere. Some want both to pass. I have seen it go both ways on the same week. There is no convention, so test it rather than assume it. The checklist I run before wiring auth into a new scraper, and the settings that keep credentials out of your logs are at proxyscraping.org. Subscribe for more on proxies for scraping.